May I welcome all members and officers and invitees to the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that this meeting is being webcast, therefore please turn off your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. Can I also remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting? Thank you.
Chair, I've received apologies from Councillors Cathy Evans and Louise Shepherd.
Okay, apologies from Louise Shepherd and Cathy Evans. Item 2 on our agenda is declarations of interest. And can I bring in Tim, our legal officer, to take us through the declarations, please?
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the agenda today, I don't anticipate any declarations. The item which might lead to some, I suspect, in some members' minds is item 5, the EAS business plan. This is a report which does concern all the schools in the borough, and therefore, in my view, there's no necessity for members of the committee today to declare any personal interest on the basis that they are governors of any of the schools, or that they have relatives or pupils, or have relatives who either work at or are pupils at any of the schools which operate within the borough. And I say that because the nature of this committee is an overview and scrutiny committee, and the fact that, as I say, this is a borough-wide plan rather than a plan which is aimed only at certain schools or categories of schools. So that would be my advice to members. Obviously, it is members' decision finally themselves as to whether they wish to declare any interests. All I would say is if they do wish to declare any interests, then they will need to record those in the on the pro forma, which is with the attendance register. But as I say, my view, Chair, is that there aren't any personal interests on what I know now. Thank you.
Sorry, are we all clear about that declaration?
Yes.
Okay. Can I thank you very much for your... Thank you. We move on then to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of November. Is 3 to 6. Are you all happy with the true record of the meeting? Item 4 there, the action sheet on page 17. Would you like to confirm that you've had these this information from the department?
Sorry, can I just add in the recommendations from the last committee? They will hopefully be with you by the end of the week.
We move on now to agenda item 5, which is to look at the EAS business plan 2018 to 2021 and the local authority annex 2018 to 29 for consultation. Okay. Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to the Scrutiny Committee. Can I introduce Sarah Davis from the EAS, Julian Dorosnik from the EAS, and Sharon Davis from the local authority. Thank you. Members, if you'd like to turn to page 21. And we've got the EAS Business Plan 2018 to 21 and the Local Authority Index there. And shall we start our questioning, please, on our theme questions? Somebody like to start on theme 1, progress towards the EAS Business Plan 2018?
Apologies. Can I ask if there's any specific changes from the previous plan to this plan that you need to highlight?
Basically, Chair, there are quite a few changes. Obviously, the first thing I would point out is that this is the regional plan, so it is the business plan across 5 regions, not just Torfaen. So you may come across some comments, particularly if I refer to things like the risks, for instance, about the business plan actually being successful. You may not recognise Torfaen in all of those risks, so there is that. In terms of the other big difference is that over the last 12 months, increasingly, whilst it is a consortia-based business plan, it is supported by 5 individual LA annexes. Now, going back several years ago, those annexes contained a lot of bespoke things for Torfaen in terms, like last year, for instance, there was the reading programme in primary schools and the rollout of that. What we are doing now, following consultation with the 5 local authorities, is the vast majority of material is actually being put into the core offer. So the LA annex is stripped back considerably for all 5, because we're trying to put as much as we can into the core business plan. In terms of some of the requests, now there was a request following last year's meeting about several things in terms of the recommendations. If I refer you to page 8 in answer to your question, section 811. Yeah. If you look at that, you've got the recommendations made by the committee in January 2017 been taken into account the draft business plan, so they are actually listed there as well. Plus, of course, all regions, all directors have received the mid-year progress towards standards report as well, which is embedded at the back of the report. So you should be in receipt or embedded in there are the 2 documents. One is the LA annex, specific annex, and the other one is review of LA performance. So there are subtle changes coming back to the sort of the point of your question, Rose, but they're more to do with the change in processes rather than the content.
Well, I accept what you're saying, but I'm now showing a little concern in that in not making the plan as, is not having those annexes in there per authority, will you still be allowed the flexibility that you were when you were doing it that way around?
Basically, again, if I come back, the idea of this is we're trying to move away from a one-size-fits-all, whereas we had sort of common things that were done across the 5, and then additional key things, but each will have their own subtle nuances, through discussions, because the whole point of this is consultation on this plan. And if you go through this document, you'll see that, this is only part of the consultation. It's gone through directors in JEG and all sorts of other levels. Cutting to the chase, if when you get through this and you actually have a look in the report about in terms of what is specific or unique for Torfaen, the way we're working now, especially with your schools, is every school is almost bespoke across the regions. Those of you who are governors, for instance, on either a primary or a secondary school governing body will know that, every one of those schools has their own unique support plans. Those support plans are discussed at an LA level in the LA QA meetings. So if anything, to respond to your concern, Councillor, is the fact that there is probably more bespoke focused work going on in Torfaen and Torfaen schools now than there's ever been, and it'll be even greater next year.
Also, we've discussed some schools' individual support plans when we've had summit meetings, and we've discussed those with you in cabinet members, seminars, also through the attainment scrutiny as well. How bespoke those are to each individual school is dependent on the need of that school, and therefore that's why the annex now becomes part of the core business offer rather than something separate.
About the work on the free school meals and non-free school meals, what work has been going on to shape the plan? Please.
Certainly. Obviously, you can see from the business plan, there's a risk. There are risks around vulnerable learner groups, and when you look at sort of section 8.10 about overall pupil performance, and then you look further on then about FSM. And outcomes, there is a considerable amount of work at a national level going on around the performance of FSM, but it's not just FSM now, it's gender, it's looked after children, and when you go through the business plan in detail, you can see the basic approaches. For instance, a recent appointment is around well-being, for instance. So we work very, very closely with Welsh Government in terms of applying locally, if you like, the strategies. So under recommendation 4, for instance, from the January 2017 meeting, where you asked the business plan should be clear about how either the EAS intends to go about closing the gap between FSM and non-FSM pupils, and how it's going to develop knowledge and understanding. If you look at the section in the business plan entitled Equity and Wellbeing, that gives a very clear steer there on the way that we are moving forward with it in response to Welsh Government, and very closely in liaison with Torfaen and the other 4 authorities. So you've got things like Office of Schools is the focus on the closing the gap in performance. Torfaen will have a bespoke plan that will be appropriate to the focus on the and progress of FSM learners within Torfaen as well. So although there's the overarching one, because each school is unique, what we'll be doing is working with those individual schools, and then that will obviously roll up into a sort of a whole Torfaen-wide provision.
I mean, I believe we're looking at theme 2 now, which is target setting. So there's a couple of things I'd like to ask on that, but one around what you're saying there about free school meals. Obviously, because of changes to universal credit, free school meals have gone down, and then it's starting to track back up again now. There's been massive changes to the curriculum over the last year, and many changes to come. Is this making meaningful target setting almost impossible?
I think last year, despite the fact, well, it's not just Torfaen schools, despite the fact that all secondary schools in Wales were at a disadvantage, particularly in English, because of the lack of information that was available and past papers, benchmark boundaries and all sorts of things like that. We embarked on a programme with all our regional secondary schools in terms of advice and benchmarking, and in fact, last year 22 out of our 36 secondary schools were all within 5% of the target set. And the remainder of those, I'll use Westmont as an example, perhaps a little bit over-ambitious and aspirational in their original targets, but when they set their final progress towards targets in June, were actually 0.2% off what they actually achieved. So whilst it's been a complication and a difficulty, the bottom-up individual pupil approach and then accumulating that will give schools a very, very good steer on where they should be. Now, it is not helped, I will say, sometimes by data releases. For instance, Welsh Government to be, sorry to use jargon, if you're not in education, there's a data set that Welsh Government released, and they're called estimates of performance, based on basically what the pupils got at Key Stage 2. They released that data 2 years ago, and that's the data that was the baseline, if you like, for setting targets for current Year 11 in secondary schools. When they released that data, they didn't take into account in any way, shape or form the new qualifications or whatever. So when we set targets in Torfaen, so when I worked with all the secondary schools in Torfaen and with the LA as well, and with Sharon and Dermot, we used that as a baseline to have discussions about individual pupils, and then came to a target that we thought was appropriate. Very interestingly now, they've just last week reissued that data, taking into account the new qualifications last year, and the implications are that basically level 2 inclusive for all schools, the estimates have come down. So I use an example. Westmont, when we set the targets last year, the estimate from Welsh Government was 67.2%. It's now 60%. Same group of pupils. So there are complications like that, but we're aware of them, and because we're aware of them, we can mitigate against them. So in short, the answer to your question is, yes, it is difficult. It is not helped by constant changes to curriculum. It is not helped by constant changes to accountability measures and data releases partway through the year. But as long as we work closely enough with the local authority and the schools to understand, then, in my belief, we are able to come to a valid target, which the school can be held to account to by you as a local authority.
Just a point on, and I wasn't on the committee in January, but in the minutes of 811, recommendation 4 on page 29, as stated in 9.5 of the report, the work of the EAS in improving outcomes for vulnerable learners will remain slow unless there is a greater engagement with all key partners across the LA and to ensure effective joint targeting of resources. I'll read 9.5. Which is very similar. The work of the EAS in improving outcomes for vulnerable learners will remain slow unless there is greater engagement. What greater engagement does Torfaen require?
As I stated at the beginning, some of these comments, it is a corporate, well, not corporate, it is across 5 authorities. There's a lot in the risk section as well that you'll be reading and thinking, well, hang on, I thought we were either addressing that, or where does that apply to Torfaen? I have to say that in Torfaen, we have very effective wider group meetings. It is very much a joined-up approach from across all aspects of the council, whether it be housing, social services, whatever. So, whilst it's in there,
It doesn't.
It is not a pertinent point to get hung up on in Torfaen.
Right.
The working partnership between the EAS and all the various aspects of Torfaen is very much joined up.
Good. Thank you.
Can we just talk about the school's internal monitoring arrangements? How can we be sure that there's consistent and effective pupil tracking across Torfaen?
I think what we've discussed this in various other meetings. What we've discovered in Torfaen is that most of our schools, if not all our schools, have robust tracking systems in place or have a decent tracking system. But what you need to remember with a tracking system is the information that's entered into that tracking system. Through our support plans, through intervention meetings, through EIB meetings, which are run collaboratively with EAS colleagues, dependent on whether it's an intervention or EIB, we're able to delve deeper into schools and look and question more on their tracking systems. And because they're reporting on progress, not only is the head teacher reporting to us, we're also getting heads of departments coming in, we're getting subject leads and expertise from the EAS coming in, so we're looking at a wealth of evidence then. So when we're looking at the tracking, we're not just looking at the data, we're saying, is that backed up? Where is the evidence now to suggest that's either on track, not on track, or whatever the concerns are, what range of evidence do we have that backs that up? So we're not just taking what's presented to us on paper, if that makes sense. So we've improved that year on year, and I'd have to say, I think, and I'm sure as you're on your governing bodies, when you're getting your heads report, it should be filtered through in those reports that the challenge and support now is far more rigorous on all sides.
And I think, sorry, Chair, I was just going to, the only thing, if I can exemplify the progress towards targets round now in March, because it's slightly different to the one that's just happened. In March, we actually have the FSM figures, because currently we don't have FSM figures. It's a national discrepancy in terms of data release. But in March, the FSM figures will all be released. So in March, when the progress towards targets data is put out to schools, you'll have our maths leads, our English leads, our science leads, all going into the targeted schools to make sure, not just through a conversation with the heads of maths, English and science, but looking at books, talking to pupils and so on. So it's a real sort of triangulation in the process. And the schools are increasingly adapting their own systems and accuracies to that level as well. So there is a level of challenge, but it's a supportive challenge, and the schools very much welcome it. And I think the big difference now as well is that the schools are using it more effectively. So it's not just a data capture exercise, but what's the data telling us, and what do we need to do differently? And in previous years, I think, and again, it's, if you like, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy under the old framework with Estin, for instance. It was all about processes. Now it's all about impact. So the schools are trying to change that as well, and are working very, very hard in Torfaen to come to these sort of new ways of working, which means that effectively the schools actually know their pupils better, the local authority knows its schools and therefore its pupils better, and it's just ramping up the accuracy.
So we've been looking at this for a few years now, so you think we've got it right now?
It's an ever-changing picture. I'm not going to say we've got it 100% right, but I think we're in a far better place than we've ever been, and we'll keep tweaking it. Each year we're tweaking it. I think, depending on the cohorts, change of staff, and all sorts of variations that occur within schools, but I think we have got to a stage where it is fairly robust. And it's about keeping that plate spinning, isn't it? I mean, it's an ever-changing picture. You can never say in education that you've cracked it, because the goalposts are forever changing, but you've got to change with those goalposts. That's in ensuring that.
Given that we're on pupil performance, looking at page 75 and then looking at page 80, I've got some concerns about, if you look at page 75, you will find that in everything apart from Welsh, there's 4 out of the 5 areas, we are above the Welsh average. If you look at page 80, in 3 out of those 5, and the one, of course, that is joint in that is Welsh, we're below. I'm not sure what page it is on your document. Page 10, page 5 and 10. What was I saying? Oh, right, yeah. In 4 out of the 5 areas, one of which is Welsh, we were above the Welsh average. In only 2 out of the 5, Welsh being one of them, we are on page 80, we are below the Welsh average. That sort of hints to me that our monitoring at primary level is still not embedded and as accurate as it should be. What is the EAS doing about that? And is my assumption correct?
As you know, it's slightly different in primary to secondary because it's not the secondary is judged with an examination at the end of it, whereas primary, it's all teacher assessment. As you know, we've been working very closely with our primary schools, because if you refer back to a few years ago, our teacher assessment was very questionable when you compare it to the outcomes on our national test. It's an improving picture. We haven't got it 100%, but it's the same across Wales. We are working with schools to through monitoring, through moderation. We know that cluster moderation is working really well in Torfaen, and not only are they looking at your secure level 4s, your secure level 5s, they are now looking at the cusp in between, and that's working well with clusters and with secondaries. Will we get it right? Absolutely not, because the system won't allow it. Because there is wriggle room in the system. Now, Welsh Government are looking at this. They are absolutely looking at the national model and how that assessment framework is going to look, and it's causing great amounts of not problems, but nobody knows which direction to go because it's such a complex issue. But we are working with our schools to do whatever we can through moderation to make sure that teacher assessment is as accurate as we can call it.
You know, I'm looking now at the EAS because we're looking at their business plan. In Newport, they are above the average for everything except Welsh, at primary and secondary. So it sounds to me as if Newport's got their teacher assessment in a better position than us. So do we need...
All right. Newport doesn't have its teacher assessment in a better place. It is very easy. If I was back in a secondary school as a head teacher, should we say I could manipulate my teacher assessment to key stage 3 levels either way. Moderation, and this is the whole thing about the moderation exercise, only looks at a limited number. The national moderation of teacher levels, the random sampling, again, looks at a very small number. So, let's assume this was an example now. Let's assume this was a moderation exercise of a cluster, and you were all primary heads, and I'm the secondary head, and we've all brought our portfolios, we've all brought our 3 portfolios, we've had a look, and we all agree, yes, that's a level 4. Or I say to you that, okay, that's a bit iffy. Is it a 4, you know, or is it a 3, or is it a 5, or is it a 4? And then we'll come to an agreement. There is no way, and this isn't a criticism, because this is, if you like, the self-fulfilling prophecy of the system, okay? Whether you go back to your school then and check all your portfolios for every single one of your children and move them from a 5 to a 4 or whatever is a matter for the individual head teacher, okay? So, bear in mind a couple of years ago, as in a local authority, you had a drive on this. So, Newport hasn't. So that may have more of a bearing on the fact that where Newport is sitting now than the fact that they've actually got it sorted. Because it's not a level playing field. And whichever way you come at it, and I'm not being critical in any way, shape or form, and we shouldn't be critical, and I want to make this absolutely clear. This is not a criticism of schools. This is not a criticism of head teachers, or coordinators, or regions, or anybody else, or governors. It is the outcome of an accountability system that isn't fit for purpose. And that's why Welsh Government are in the process of consultation as we speak on moving forward, because in England they've scrapped it. It's gone to the Progress 8. So, and I'm not saying we follow England or whatever, okay? But until you do that, comments like that, well, it's not even apples and pears. You're talking fruit and meat in some cases. Okay, so we need to be very, very careful when we look outside our own patch, because we know what's going on in our own patch, i.e. Torfaen, but different authorities, different approaches, different head teachers, different approaches.
While I agree with every word that you've spoken, you would still expect there to be a correlation between where you are at primary level and where you are at secondary level. And it seems to me that our primary level, in everything except Welsh, is above the Welsh average. And in secondary level, in everything except English, I think, science and Welsh, I can't remember which ones it is, but out of the 5, 2 of them are below the Welsh, 3 of them are below the Welsh average. And I find that, I understand what you're saying, and yeah, teacher assessment is not easy, but you would expect there to be a correlation between the results you're getting at primary level and the results you're getting at secondary level. And in Torfaen, it doesn't seem to be applying. I mean, if we take, I know I've taken Newport, I'll take Blaenau Gwent. They're below the Welsh average for everything, comprehensive and in primary, which tells me something about Blaenau Gwent that in terms of their moderation and their teacher assessment.
As I said, it's a very complex issue, and even with Blaenau Gwent, the fact that they're below in both, there's a conversation that could be had around that. The progress from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 4, is a national measure. It's the value-added measure, and it's the data that is released. Now, there's been all sorts of discussions for donkey's years around the validity and the progress, and the assumption that you make sort of 2 levels of progress at Key Stage 3. So if someone comes in with a 4, which is the expected level at Key Stage 2, they should be on a 6 at the end of Key Stage 3. Therefore, if they're on a 6, that's a guaranteed C at GCSE. Well, it doesn't work like that, because the other thing is primary schools and secondary schools teach a very different approach currently, or should we say prior to the last 12 months. And now it's been more aligned around skills and skills development. Secondary schools have been able to get away for years with taking it easy at Key Stage 3, and as you're all aware, I'm an ex-secondary head myself, take it easy at Key Stage 3, throw everything at Key Stage 4, and when we had the days of BTECs, it was even easier. We're now getting to the point where we can't do that anymore. There's only so many after-school sessions, only so many Saturday mornings, only so many holidays you can bring the kids in to do extra. We just need to be addressing the real elephant in the room, which we just need really good, appropriate teaching from primaries right the way through to secondaries together. And that's the only way we're going to address this, and we can argue around data. And finally, thank goodness, in my own personal opinion, the new Common Inspection Framework is more aligned with that than it's ever been. The new approaches around Successful Future is a brave new world, and unfortunately we're in times of massive changes with even bigger changes to come. But they'll be the right changes. So we can spend a huge amount of time debating historical inadequacies, to be honest. For me, the more important thing is taking this business plan from the point of view of Torfaen and from the point of view of the schools and more importantly, the children in these schools, and looking forward how we can best serve them during this turbulent period to improve the standards.
Which takes me to the point of, do the changes in the curriculum and the unknowns surrounding that make it difficult or even impossible to set meaningful targets? And how will the change in the curriculum link the primaries and secondary schools?
I think I've touched on the target setting one before. I think you can still set reasonably accurate targets, but a target should always be aspirational. If you're hitting your targets, you've undersold yourself in the first place with the level of challenge. Coming in for me 2-3% shy of a target, which was aspirational, it is good because you're stretching it. It has made it hugely difficult. It made it massively difficult last year for English more so than maths, although maths went to the 2 new qualifications. With English, there was hardly anything to go on. There was one so-called practice paper, which didn't pay a lot of resemblance to the actual ones that the pupils sat. They didn't release grade boundaries, so we couldn't tell. And to be honest, I think, if I'm being brutally honest, one of the reasons our region did so well, it's a hell of a way to describe performance, isn't it? If you look at the 22 authorities across Wales last year, 4 out of the top 5 authorities in Wales, of which Torfaen was 3rd, and this is a positive, with the smallest drops at level 2+. Yeah. Everybody dropped, some plummeted. 4 out of our 5 regions were in the top 5 with the smallest drops. I firmly believe one of the reasons for that is because we didn't know genuinely like the schools. When our English teams were going around all the individual schools, they were working on the premise that the CD borderline would be 60%. So if you can prepare your pupils to get the 60%, you should be safe on a C. When the exams actually came out, the CD borderline, the benchmark was 53. Now, you know what it's like. You set yourself a goal of, say, 60, and you work hard at it, and then you always miss that goal by a couple of percent. If we'd set the goal at 53, and you miss it by 2 or 3%, you don't get the C. Because we set the bar at 60, most schools missed that 60, but still came in above the 53, so they got the Cs. And I think that was a major contributory factor to why the AS as a region did really well, and Torfaen, you know, the third, I can't say highest performer, but the third smallest drop out of 22 authorities in Wales. The reason for that was around the English. Now, that's a hell of a way to deal with children's futures, in that people are working on best guesstimate. Now, that's part. English and maths and numeracy, done. Let's switch to science. Science are now in an identical position this year as English was last year. We've moved back to the GCSE or level 2 qualifications. If you're a new teacher of science, which has come into the profession in the last 5 years, perhaps you haven't even taught GCSE because the route was BTEC. But again, there's no exemplar papers, there's no... so we're back with best guesstimates for science. So, coming back to your comment, you can begin to see how difficult it is for schools, for LAs, for consortia. But I think the best thing is, you add that element of rigour, and if you don't hit that, hopefully it'll still be above the benchmark to get you that, the grade that you want. So it is incredibly difficult, and I think this is why the recognition is Welsh Government, with the new Successful Futures, the current consultation period is out now for, to use the buzzword, the new accountability model. In other words, how they're going to measure how pupils are succeeding or not. And it's really important that, local authorities, we've sent our response in already, respond to that, because we need a system that's actually going to be fair on the pupils. And I don't mean fair on us, but it's got to be fair on these pupils so they know what they've got to do, and fair on the teachers so they know that what they've got to do to get those pupils to those levels. So it's a really difficult, turbulent time. But I will say, in Torfaen, well done, third smallest drop. But it is around, I think that's testimony to the way, the close working relationship between the local authority and us. We've worked incredibly hard together to get to that place. It hasn't just happened. And, as a local authority, you can feel sort of rightly proud of your schools and, of yourself as a local authority to get to that position.
Can I just add to that? I think the piece of work we've done on teacher assessment with primaries and secondaries, we've included all our schools, I think put us in a very strong place with our schools to have honest and transparent conversations with our schools. And I don't know, Rose, whether you're privy to that. Yes, we challenge, but also it's about, we need to know where the school is at so that we can put the right level of support in. And I think the results demonstrate that. In the last summer's results has demonstrated that, and then we can build on that and move forward. I think we're in a place possibly better than other local authorities with our head teachers and with governors that we can have those honest and transparent conversations and to say, right, okay, what are the concerns, what are the issues, how do we resolve that collectively? And it's not, hopefully, it's not about just judging the school and saying, well, you're not good enough, you need to do something about it. Hopefully we've removed that element. Yes, there's an element of challenge, but it comes with the support as well. And I think we've worked on that over the last 3 years, and the results this summer demonstrate that.
Sheridan, thank you.
Chair, two things, I suppose. Well, one thing is that, while I accept that, that doesn't get away from the fact that we're all governed by the data, and, in some key high-stakes areas, the authority still was underperforming across a range of those indicators, which I accept. You talk about how you realise the difficulties of sort of getting the data right in terms of moving in preparation, judging performance before the exam. But of course that didn't stop some schools being directly criticised post-exam period last year about the way they were putting in data. So it's not a way you're actually blaming them for something they didn't really, you saying there's an operational issue with them, that they're not getting it right? Because you just said about how difficult it is to actually get that input right.
Can I just clarify, criticised by who?
Well, there was, when we had the previous report, there was an issue that schools that had specific shortcomings in certain areas. The reason given was that they had not been rigorous enough in how they measured the data that was going in terms of the judging how pupils were going to perform.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just saying now, though, that you understand that that's an issue with schools.
Right.
It didn't seem an issue. You must have understood that last year in terms of the difficulty schools were having.
I think we're talking about two separate things now. We're talking about a national accountability model, which is imposed from top down, which all schools have to adhere to and are measured against, as against the ability of a school, and in particular individuals in a school, to carry out their role successfully or to the best possible thing. Now, we're all human. We're all better at some things than others, and if we didn't recognise that some schools' performance could be improved by improving certain aspects, then there's no point in having an improvement service, and there's no point in having CPD, and there's no point in having these meetings, because let's just let people carry on and doing what they've always done, and then you can always have what you've always got. So you have to identify in terms of improvement. Now, how you do it is the important thing, because quite often new systems, new measures, some people require more support than others. We do and that's why later on in the report, when the initial question was around moving away from an LA annex, the point I made then was all schools have bespoke support plans. We are actually delivering bespoke training to some people on a one-to-one coaching. In fact, Rose, if I'm the CA for your school, and as you know, I've been in there quite a lot lately, but helping individuals. And it's not a criticism. It's because basically we have so many new systems and so many things that basically we need people with either the experience or understanding to support these people and model it and assist them. Now, if the point that you're making is the fact that these people have been identified, yes, they have. But we've put the support in. It's not a blame culture. We're not here for blame. We don't go in. We don't have no statutory powers or anything. That's the head teacher, the governing body, and ultimately the local authority. Our role is very much identifying where the needs are for improvement, and then, for want of a more blunt phrase, putting our money where our mouth is and getting in there, rolling our sleeves up, and supporting these people to do it. Because at the end of the day, our reputation is built on the 5 local authorities, which is built on the 36 secondary schools and the 200 and odd primary schools, which is built on every leader, every teacher. So we're all in this together. So this isn't an us and them. We've always been, and I think we have an increasingly close working relationship with schools, with the local authority, that if we go in and identify something, people are actually comfortable, because what happens is they know that we're going to go in there and support them. It's not a case of come in, tell you how bad you are, and I'm coming back in a 12-month and you better be better. We don't work like that.
Thanks. I just wanted to go on to literacy performance. Literacy obviously supports access to all of the curriculum, doesn't it? It's massive. And current tests indicate poor performance in literacy, so I just wonder what your focus is there. What are you going to do? What specific actions are you going to have to drive standards up?
We've just, in conjunction with schools, we are increasingly now, if you like, using the expert knowledge and the research that's available now, and pulling groups of schools together to work together to develop various strategies, support materials and so on. So our new literacy strategy, for instance, which has just come on stream this academic year, was led by some staff with Basleg School, but also the Basleg cluster of primary schools, working across many other schools to develop what we think is the right approach in developing literacy, because obviously literacy, it's about the reading, and we've got examples in our own authority where, schools are effectively putting in accelerated reader, for instance, and the data proves that, it's working. But it's not just the reading, it's the oracy, and of course it's the boys issue, with the boys lagging behind. So when you look at our plan, it is a real commitment, because everything now as well is around skills. So we've got a new literacy strategy. We've got new literacy support going into the primary schools in particular on a school-to-school basis. And then we are actively encouraged. Another thing you'll see in the report, I don't know if any of you have picked up or may question me later on as well, our way forward as well, we are actively encouraging development work around clusters. And that's not clusters of primaries or clusters, it's around the secondary school and all the cluster primaries. So, for instance, I'll use Torvine as an example. In Westmont, for instance, they've got a particularly effective piece of work being developed at the moment with the secondary school and the primary school around common approaches to teaching of skills. And the primary school teaches a joint planning with the secondary and vice versa. They go into each other's establishments. In Cwmbran High, they're in the process of just kicking off the new programme around reading and how we can ensure that all pupils are at least functional readers, so when they make that transition, at least they can access the Key Stage 3 curriculum. So there's an awful lot going on across the piece, but it all revolves around the new literacy strategy, which has been worked up in conjunction between us and schools.
Ask a question, how are you going to benchmark that piece of work? You're going to look at what is happening at the moment and how are you going to measure the improvement?
Well, unfortunately, as we're all aware, there isn't a national benchmark test, because where we've got the national reading test, for instance, and if you flip the coin over to numeracy, and you've got the national numeracy test, there's a clear steer from Welsh Government that they can't be used as benchmarking performance data. So it is increasingly difficult. But what we are doing where we are piloting this, it is really important not to carry on with something which isn't working. So where it's being piloted, all pupils are being given sort of baseline testing, so we know where they currently are. They then go through the programme, a bit like you've done, Rose, with the accelerated reader. You do the accelerated reader baseline test, you get a value. You put them through the intervention, you retest, and hopefully the value is increased because you've added. So, as with everything, we are finding that we are having to use, if you like, external programmes to put the baseline in and then measure progress afterwards, because we have to demonstrate impact. There is no point, money is so scarce, in investing in these things if they're not going to work, or if they're not going to work at the right pace as well for these pupils. So we baseline in it against individual tests in a similar way to you are, but the national picture is different.
Just ask. Oh, sorry.
Just ask a question about this with this literacy and everything. Are the targets that we're aspiring to when they leave primary school, and particularly through Key Stage 3, are they challenging enough? Are we a bit hung up on this level 4 and level 5? What are we doing about the marginals? And what are we doing about more able and talented? Why is 6 and 7 acceptable? Why aren't we looking at 8, 9, even 10? And also at the end of that as well, with these individual pupils, you're saying about the tracking systems, but it's also, I would say tracking's only a fraction of what the work needs to be done. Is actually the intervention work done, how it's identified per pupil, how it's then relayed through the middle management and the senior leadership team to the progress and the heads of department to actually get those results up and add value to the system. And finally, on top of all that, is that pupils that are more able and talented, what has been done in individual schools to give them more qualifications, value added if you like, that obviously also drive up the authorities' figures if they achieve those extra qualifications. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful.
No. So if I just clarify before I start, which first of all about levels,
Yeah.
then tracking, to a lesser extent,
Well,
intervention more than tracking, and then more able and talented.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Let's start with levels.
With the value-added qualifications. So, for example, if achieved A star in maths, for example, what other qualifications like literacy, numeracy skills can be added into the mix to give that extra qualification?
Okay. Right. If I start with levels, levels are about to change this year. Okay. Quick précis, those of you who are governors and have done data training, as you know, expected level of performance at the end of Key Stage 2 is a 4. Expected level of performance at the end of Key Stage 3 is a 5. Let's take maths. If you get a 5 at Key Stage 3, because there's an absolute wealth of data out there about transition matrices, big words again, it's how many kids get the higher qualifications, okay? If you get a level 5 2 years ago, at Key Stage 3 in maths, you had a 24% chance of getting the higher grades at GCSE. Okay? If you got a level 6, statistically, and this is within about 90% accuracy, statistically, level 6 at the end of Key Stage 3, you had an 81% chance of getting the higher grades. So the push towards getting them level 6s, not just level 5s, was really, really important, because that gives you your higher, your better grades, you're more able and talented. So in some ways, we've all been condoning underperformance by saying that the expected levels are 4 and 5. That's about to change anyway. So that's levels. Next thing, tracking. Yeah, it is important to identify your more able and talented, your vulnerable learners. Intervention in most secondary schools at the moment, and now we still can't afford to drop the ball, if you like, but intervention has been, whether it was in the days of Schools Challenge Cymru or even now, has always been about year 11. We've got to get them through maths and English and 3 others, and we've got to get the level 2 plus up to this, okay? And that's what all the tracking's been about. Now, we are telling schools, and well, I say we're telling, so we are working with schools, and schools are responding positively. They are doing the same sort of thing. In year 11, you know, if you were ahead, you'd bring your head of maths and your head of English together on a weekly basis. Right, who's on for a C and above, who's on for a C, who isn't, who's on D, and whether they're going to get the other 3, you know, and it's been hammered, and it's now done really, really well. Okay? Now that's got to happen in 10, 9, 8, 7. So that basically you are identifying pupils in year 7 who may be good at maths but not so good at English, or maybe good at numeracy but not so good at reading, or not so good at oracy, and put the intervention in back there. So that when they come through to Key Stage 4, we'll deliver the course, they'll be successful, we all go home happy, whether it's local authority, consortia, the parent, and more importantly the pupil. That is now happening. But of course it's going to take time to work through. And that's why the new Common Inspection Framework around skills is a really good document, you know, all these sorts of things. More able and talented, in some ways have been a poor relative if you think about it, because if you're in a certain type of school, let's say, I don't know, Caerleon, Cardiff High, you know, the expectation is most pupils will get AA star, and that's what they're taught. Everything is geared to that. They're taught to it, they're tracked to it, they're pushed to it, and so on. If you're in a school in a more deprived area, the big thing is the school's got to get that level to, you know, get a C, push them up to get a C, and not necessarily the higher grade. If you look at the percentage of A star A grades distributed, or 5 A star A grades, in data up to now, most schools, unless you are the Cardiff Highs of the world, are not where they should be. Okay? Now is a big difference. Now it's got an importance in the measure. Okay? So now there's a focus, things will improve, because it hasn't been a focus. And that's why when you look at our business plan, we've actually got a more able and talented coordinator how to work with the schools. So, yeah. So that's why they are there now to push. And it's the same now when we do the data capture, the progress towards target. If you have a look now, when those come through for schools, if you're governor, we've got A-star A on there. All right? Now, in terms of the other subjects, and in terms of the more able talent, so what happens if I'm a really talented artist, or I'm a talented musician, or a linguist? You know, with the new qualifications, we still, you know, if you look at the Welsh Bac and the CAP 9, which are going to be the two big measures, the CAP 9 actually does something really positive, because I'm no longer marginalised as a music teacher, because what I get in, my pupils get in music contributes significantly to the CAP 9 score for the school. So whereas it's always been about sort of maths, English and three others, now everybody is in the hunt. So everybody should be pushing, you know, and teaching and maximising the potential to maximise the points. And it's not just more able and talented. For me, yeah, more able and talented is one area, and it's never just been about the CD borderline. But if, I don't know, let's say if your son was in my school and the best your son could actually achieve or was targeted for an F, and we've pushed and pushed and pushed and they get an E, hey, they've overachieved. So it's about every pupil and every grade, and that's what the CAP 9 does. Because the more grades you get, the more points you get. And that's why I actually like the CAP 9 as a lead measure, because it will make every pupil in every subject, not just maths and English, important. Have I answered your point there?
Yeah, so it's about extra qualifications there.
The extra qualification comes in...
For example, the school I'm governor of, there's those who've already got maths in the bag, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
They do a financial literacy exam as well.
Yeah. Right.
Obviously another bit of value added.
There's a sort of a yin and yang, positive and negative to that. Welsh Government at the moment are trying to stop early entry.
That's what I'm asking the question.
Okay, so Welsh Government, and the reason they're going to stop Welsh Government, and I sit on the Welsh Government PISA group, for my sins. It was a directive, not an invite. But basically, all this is around schools in Wales in the top 25% bracket, the more able and talented bracket, are massively underperforming compared to the other countries we want to be measured against. So, a lot of what is done, subversively for want of a better phrase, don't mean it that one, but a lot of what's being done is to basically boost performance. So if PISA was doing it right in the top 25%, I don't think math would have been such an issue. But because we're not, it is an issue. But if we think about it, let's just come back. Surely we're all about maximising every individual's performance. And coming back to the thing about the qualifications, if you look at the new Welsh Bac measure, it's either maths, numeracy or maths, English, okay, 2 sciences, and then others. But they can only be, whereas we had BTECs before, so for instance, if you think about it, if my son wasn't particularly able, he might want to go off and do engineering or car mechanics. It still counts for the individual, but it won't count for the headline score if they've got 2 other qualifications like that. Only 2 can count. So in some ways, dare I say, and be really controversial, the new measures at the moment actually make it more difficult for schools in deprived areas to improve, because they're forcing people into a narrower option, and there are ways around it. We've got several schools in the region, for instance, who have made Key Stage 4 a 3-year course. And they're doing everything, and they're doing it really well, and the kids are coming out with the A-star A's above expect. So there's ways around it. But basically, at the moment, they are doing other qualifications. It's not always possible. They don't always contribute to what will be the headline measures for the school, or the local authority, or the consortia. But the moral question, I suppose, I would ask is, are we in it for the pupils, or... So, me personally, you know, it's about maximising every pupil. If you maximise every pupil, the headline indicators will take care of themselves. Trust me.
Which takes me to the point, do you think our staff in our schools are sufficiently skilled to differentiate properly?
Differentiate in terms of?
Of what is achievable of one child, and you know, and are we challenging enough of the possible A-star pupils who sometimes can be more disruptive because they're not stretched and challenged enough.
Absolutely. Simple answer? No, we're not.
Right.
That's a blanket answer, but don't feel that that means it's not everybody in every school. A lot of people, are, they're identified. It does happen. Classic example, target setting last year. Second brightest boy in the school in year 11, but the brightest pupil in year 11, in terms of their probabilities with GCSE maths, was being taught in set 4. So when I asked the head of maths, why is this pupil in set 4? I was told, he's a bit of a flippant Jack the lad, he always gives the funny comedy answer, so we put him in there. So my next question was, always at the fact that you weren't stretching him with your teaching, he was board stiff, because I have to admit, I'm a bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper myself when I was in school. So if I wasn't being stretched, you're bound to. So coming back to the answer, I think it's like this new culture, isn't it? And I think, like with everybody, we're all human. We'll all move to that. We'll all get there. And staff are really conscious about this now and are working hard. Certainly in all the schools I go in, the vast majority of staff are working hard to play catch up, to be able to have the skills. I mentioned earlier on, it's like if you're a young science teacher, you may not have taught GCSE science, only BTEC science, and that's a different ballgame altogether. So it's about us supporting teachers, back to us putting our money where our mouth is, where we're identified, and making sure that we are supporting the staff in these schools, not criticising them, but supporting them and saying, right, we need to be doing this, and this, try this, try that, and this is why we're setting up things like triads in schools, triads of schools. So working together, school to school, is the only way to take this forward successfully. It won't move forward with me simply going in and saying, this isn't good enough, or so it's not. But you've got to recognise that fact, and then have the conversation about what are we going to do about it.
My point, being the chair of governors of a comprehensive school, we're putting a lot of effort into intervention. Could that differentiation be put into the primary level a lot earlier, and identifying pupils where they're lacking and giving that extra intervention so that they can access the curriculum when they come up to comprehensive?
I think primary teaching allows, it's slightly different to secondary, and I think primaries are slightly better at differentiation because they have the children with them. It's one teacher, one class throughout that school year, so you build up that relationship. You know the trigger points, you know what works well, what doesn't, who your vulnerable groups are, because they don't change from within that class. Very rarely would they change unless you get new children in or new children out. That class remains with that class teacher, and therefore in some respects you'd expect that classroom teacher to be able to differentiate because they know those children better. Also, coming back to the differentiation, let's not forget, as we mentioned earlier, goalposts have dramatically shifted. The new Western framework, there's new teaching standards coming in, the curriculum, successful futures, all these are all in the mix as well. And again, it comes back to what Julian says, it's about the support now for teachers so that they can shift with those goalposts as seamless as possible, because we want them to come back onto those learners, and it should lessen that intervention at the top end to think, no, we're catering, they don't need intervention, because you're quite right. The teachers acknowledge, this child needs this. That child, however, I need to do it slightly different. This child, I need to use a different terminology because those two, it's about understanding your children, knowing where your learners are, and then plotting for the next steps.
Is that information being transitioned with the child?
I think schools are getting better at it, and admittedly I think it's hit and miss with some schools, some children, but I think each year it's getting better, and especially with all these changes now and with cluster work, I think it's being picked up and being addressed. Whether we'll see the impact of it now, I think it's still an improving picture.
I agree with everything Sharon said, but to put a little bit more detail on it, if you think back 4 or 5 years ago, the only transition data you got, or the only transition you did, was basically the one on the SEN register, your behaviour problems, and they came up for a day in the summer to see what the secondary school like, and all of a sudden they're now your pupil in September. You know, we've moved on massively from that, and now we're actually at the cusp of, I think for the first time ever, actually talking about learning across Key Stage 2 and 3. It's always been about behaviour or, you know, well-being issues. Now we're actually starting to talk about teaching and learning across. You know, you're doing it, for instance, with the Reading with Your cluster. Westmont are doing it with a slightly different way. But there is a realisation that primary schools have to understand what the secondary schools have to do to get these pupils through to a successful grade at the end of year 11, whether it be GCSE or whatever. And I think there's an understanding that, because you know they are taught in a very different way, but how primary schools work, and when the two meet and then start to plan jointly and teach across the divide, which is starting to happen as well. You know, secondary school teachers are going down and seeing how teaching is planned and delivered in Key Stage 2. Primary school teachers are going up in the secondary schools. It's very, very much in its infancy. But if you think about it, if that has a big impact now, we're talking 5, 6 years before that comes through to year 11. But we've got to be able to say it has to happen, and we've got to be patient. And this is the problem, is we're now sort of juggling two very big balls. One, we can't drop the ball at year 11, because if our GCSE results go down, if I'm the head, the chair of governors, the teacher, the school, the local authority, it looks bad on us. So we've got to keep everything that we do in and all the intervention going at year 11, when really what would be nice if they just said, right, keep doing what you're doing. We're not going to measure you or punish you over the next 4 years, but you've got 4 years to get that to come through from the primaries. But we're starting to work on that, I genuinely believe. For me, one of the most exciting things in this business plan, and it's only one line, is the bit about cluster working. Because for once we are trying to join up teaching and learning from primary into secondary, rather than blaming the Key Stage 2 levels for not being accurate, or rather than saying, well, you know, we finished with them, we gave them to you, look, and you failed them. So whichever way you look at it, but that's breaking down.
Go back to the sort of a business plan and look at the gender gap. We don't seem to be making any sort of progress with this, and this has been a thing that's been going on for years as well. You know, what are we going to do about it now? And I'd just like perhaps Sharon's interpretation as well. What we can do at very early years. Are we doing enough to intervene, and are we looking at new interventions, reinventions? And
absolutely. It's about looking as well, but as you say, it's coming back to what building on what Julian says now. It's looking at clusters, working together, looking at what the cohort is. Also, schools looking individually at their cohorts as well. I know when I was head, I was boy heavy in my school, so I had to seriously change the curriculum to address that, so I could improve, make the topics more boy-related than girls. Not forgetting the girls, but it is a balancing act. You've got to know your children in your schools, and then you change your curriculum accordingly to that. I think schools are far, far better now. There's a richer picture now of that happening, and through cluster work, absolutely. But it's also looking then, not just gender, because sometimes children fall into several different labels and different boxes, so they wouldn't just be gender, they'd be FSM, they could be your vulnerable groups. It's ensuring that whatever intervention any learner is accessing is the right intervention for that learner. It's looking at their needs and what needs addressing, and therefore not just thinking, oh, here's an intervention I've just picked off the shelf, I'm going to do this one with it because it's an intervention. Well, we all know that doesn't work. We all know that in the past that has been happening in schools. Oh, this group is having catch-up literacy because they're weak on their literacy skills, and you think, yeah, but is it addressing their needs? Is it actually addressing every child's individual needs? So schools now have a better understanding. We have a better understanding of the needs of the learners as well. Are we making the impact now? No, but we've got a better understanding. We are working with our schools now through support plans, through various other interventions, to make sure that the interventions we're supporting them with are the right ones, so that we can narrow those gaps, and not just for gender but for FSM and all our learners.
if you actually look at the report, the section under gender actually, if you like, almost could be part of a golden thread that links everything we've just been talking about. Because if you look at the fact that if you look at foundation phase, the gender gap widened. Now we all know that in areas of high deprivation, families, parental influence. This is why Sure Start was introduced and all the preschooling things. Whether they should be having even further impact, comes back to funding issues and at times where everybody's making cuts, they're very conscious decisions. But I think increasingly what's happening is more pupils or more children are coming into a school in age with issues. Not in all issues, so that tells you one thing about an area like Torfaen where you have pockets of very high deprivation. Once they actually get into school, so interestingly, at Key Stage 2 in Torfaen, the gap closes. That's because they're now in full-time education and the lack of parental input for some of these pupils becomes less significant, although I know they're only in school for 195 days a year and so on, but they've got more of an input coming from the school. Key Stage 3, it widens. Why? Key Stage 3 hasn't been seen as important. I've said that, and it's a particular mantra of mine, and I'm probably boring you may say it so many times in other scrutiny media, but it's a fact. And then at 4, we're trying to redress the gap and basically just get everybody through quickly at Key Stage 4. Everything that we've talked about, by refocusing Key Stage 3, by making it a skills focused, by putting the additional support in to support teachers to be able to deliver a better quality consistently at Key Stage 4, to work across that Key Stage 2-3 divide. All those sorts of things will impact. They'll impact on everybody. If you remember what I've said, if we just deal with the individual pupil and maximise everything around them, all these indicators will take care of themselves. We are still going to have the cases where, we know, acute cases around social deprivation and well-being. You're still going to have those because we're dealing with human beings. But at least we'll have a system where, for once, the individual pupil is genuinely at the heart of it, from reception through to either 16 or 18, and then we will actually see the improvements. And we'll still be having these conversations next year, the year after, and the year after, because until what we are putting in place now bears fruit, it's not going to have the impact. You can't just suddenly throw, you can throw money at year 11 intervention, and depending who's in the group, let's face it, it's quite often boys, and that's why the gap narrows, because most of the ones underperforming are usually, or more of them underperforming, are boys. So isn't it funny, when we throw money at underperforming pupils in year 11, the gap closes. That's because most of them are boys. So there's a real joined-up thinking behind this, but I genuinely believe what's in this business plan about cluster working, getting down into the Key Stage 3, developing the skills, supporting schools honestly and earnestly to do it, and that's our role. When it's something we don't shy away from, we relish, because we're in it together. Those conversations, it would be nice. I'll be retired by then, but in about 5 years' time, you'll be sitting here thinking, look how these gaps have narrowed.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to bring up attendance and exclusions, which is something schools are all measured on, as well as local authorities, and I don't know about the EAS, but
it's not our responsibility.
no, but
Yes.
there is a cause for concern, and I've had to email this morning on children that are actually abusing staff, actually assaulting staff, and although there's a series of exclusions made, we've had to have a police officer outside the school for a particular child, and we've asked the LA for support in this, and it's not forthcoming. So how can we not, it's about disrupting other pupils, obviously, but there is obviously some serious concerns about one particular student that needs support. And if the school is asking for that support and it's not forthcoming, how can we deal with that?
The only thing I could say is that I'll speak to you later and we can see why not the support isn't forthcoming, because it should be. And then we can discuss that further this is an appropriate forum.
No, I wasn't.
But we can.
I wasn't expecting that.
No. But I can't comment on that because I don't know the.
But very often, very often, schools are at a wit's end with a particular behaviour problem, and they identify it to the LA or what have you, and there isn't support there. So, do you think there is a need for more support in this type of case?
I think we just have to look at it. It'd be foolish for me to comment on a broad spectrum because each, as you know, with exclusions, we need to look at each case individually and see what support package has been offered before that. It's looking at before and not just that one-off incident. It's looking at what's occurred for that as a build-up to with that.
It was a general thing. Is there any support on exclusions for schools?
I think so, because when you look at our exclusions, we are at primary, we've been pretty static, it's been pretty low. 1 or 2 schools have, and we've addressed those and are working with those schools. We know one primary school in particular has dropped their exclusion rates phenomenally over the autumn term, but we've had external consultant working with the school and such like, and we'll be looking at what lessons learned from that, how we can then share that with other schools. We've been working with individual secondary schools as well, and we are seeing on the whole that exclusions are coming down. So that's a positive. However, it's an improving picture and it's working with individual schools to see how we can better that then.
Chair, if I may just, I think that the important thing is, it's the AS business plan, and theoretically, we don't have statutory responsibility for attendance or exclusions. So the only point I would make around that is that a lot of low-level exclusions come through disruption because of teaching, in some aspects. So I think as teaching and learning improves, the level will go down anyway. So whilst we may not have statutory responsibility for it, if you like, it is intrinsically linked, whether you like it or not. So improving the quality of teaching and learning. And I would just reiterate what we said before is, we have a very, very strong working relationship across all aspects of the local authority. So when we have wider group meetings, yes, I'm there to talk about the school improvement angle, but inevitably in there as well, it is all around the support for schools for attendance and exclusions as well. So I would just reiterate that.
I'd like to ask about inspections, because it seems to me that our results of inspections are actually getting worse. Yeah. Do we think this is because of a stricter Estin regime, or is it because there are elements more around disruption?
I'm an Estin inspector as well, so I can speak from both sides of the fence. Not that I want to be an Estin inspector, but if you can see what they're doing, you've got a chance to prepare your schools. I think, to be fair, all primary schools, the way primary schools work, and it's on a smaller scale, they're more consistent in their approaches. So we've had some really, really very positive inspections, mainly primary, excellence across the board, an excellent case study. So we've got a lot of examples of the primary school. When you come to secondaries, it's a different ballgame. When the training for the new Common Inspection Framework, which came in September the 1st, I went on the initial training, as we all did, and you did as well, there we are. So, and you think to yourself, oh, okay, yeah, that's changed, that's fine, I'll go away, we'll do that. And then I went and did the first inspection. And it's a bit like trying to put, those of you old enough, trying to put an MFI piece of furniture together. The instructions didn't match the wardrobe. Because the school I inspected, and wouldn't we all love to be in this position, was benchmark quarter 1 for the last 4 years, in all measures at key stage 4 and 3, above modelled outcomes, attendance was benchmark, and they'd given themselves excellent in their own self-evaluation. On the Thursday, we gave them adequates across the board and put them into Estin review, because it's all about pupils' progress in skills. Whereas before it was all about outcomes, and this is what I'm saying, although the new framework is catching schools out and putting them into categories and so on, it's actually right because it's all about skills and pupil progress. Before, dare I say, you could orchestrate a really good inspection report by having all the right processes in place and all the right policies and getting the people to say the right thing. And trust me, I've been through so many as a head as well. Don't get me wrong, so I've been on both sides, but you could do that. Now you can't, there's nowhere to hide. And I think what's happened is, for the secondary heads, it's come as a bit of a shock, because they think their standards are good, but when they start to look at pupils' progress and skills across Key Stage 3, of course, this big gaping hole. So what we've done, as an organisation, is as soon as I did that, because it was only the second inspection in Wales, I came straight back, I sent all the documents around to all the schools in the region, and we've been running sessions with head teachers to brief them on the implications of the new framework, so that they're actually aware that your standards might be good. Is your progress in skills where it needs to be? Is your documentation, can they actually trace through from your self-evaluation to your improvement plan that the right things are going to? It's all these little things. So it's all these subtle nuances. So it's not just here in Torfaen or across the region. They're flying in across Wales. Now I'm starting to question where the capacity is in Estyn for them to keep doing all these revisits. You know, they're already gone to a 7-year cycle instead of 6 under the new framework. So it is more down to, it's a new framework. Don't get me wrong, there's still things in there that you'd want to pick up. But I think the difference between before, where you might get away with just doing the post-inspection action plan or going into a form of follow-up, now is more to do with schools falling foul of misunderstanding the new framework. And I think this is why we've rapidly acted to try and brief people. And the schools that have missed it, I've gone into schools, you know, and I do it with senior leadership teams. Because if you know, you can prepare. Now, the only problem is, if you haven't been tracking and you've got no evidence of progress or skills, you can't make it up. So if you're going to be inspected any time the rest of this year, and you haven't been doing it, you're still going to be caught. But if you start now, and you're inspected autumn term next academic year, you'll have 2 terms worth of evidence to say to them, look, we're doing it.
One is, my comprehensive crossing Holyoke has just got an inspection team in, and yeah, I bet. But the real question is that in this business plan? And it is. It's fallen in time for you to get it into this business plan. Okay.
I think if you look at what we do in our own leadership development and the work of CA, we are massively amending the work, in particular the secondary CAs, so that we're actually getting in schools, we're modelling it, we work with it. You'll know if you have a chat to David, for instance, you know, the amount of time I've been in Crossy lately, working with staff, just trying to get them to realise what the new framework means and how we need to be changing things. But having said that, please don't say, whereas before we used to jump through hoops for Estyn, the new framework is good practice, is what you'd want your schools to be doing, whether from the point of view of a governor, a teacher, or a parent of a child in that school. So the emphasis on impact rather than process and on skills development is what you'd want as a parent, and it's what you'd want as an LA and so on. So I'm not saying that we're going in and teaching schools to jump through hoops, because we're not. We're going in and we're working with staff bottom up to make sure that what the child gets is 5 good lessons a day. Because then, as I said before, everything else takes care of itself.
Please, Chair. It can be really demoralising for staff if they've worked really hard. They've had a monitoring visit. They've written their PR on the recommendations that the inspection has given her. Then they come in with a new framework, which is in the head of the inspectors, but the PR has been worked on the previous recommendations. So is there any leniency within and I'm probably asking the wrong person, in the Estyn recommendations for schools that are in the middle of both the transition, I suppose, of that?
What was stated in the training was that if a school was inspected prior to September the 1st under the old framework and was placed in a follow-up category, i.e. the Estin monitoring as it was then, that the school would be reviewed under the old framework. Of course, come September, October was a nice letter from Estin saying that contrary to that, all schools, whether they're in a category or a statutory category, will be re-inspected under the new framework. So it's a bit of apples and pears. In terms of the PIAP and planning, what I will say, Rose, in response to that, is this whole issue around planning. Because at the moment we've realised, and this is where we can draw it back to the business plan, we've realised as an organisation that, if you don't mind, if I use your school as an example, you've got a post-inspection action plan, which, as you know, I helped you work on. Then we did, with Sharon and you again, the LA Statement of Action, which is basically the action plan to get the school out of significant improvement. Then is the EAS support plan for that. Then is the support plan for maths from the EAS. Then is the support plan for English from the EAS. Now, I'm not being funny. We're spending more time writing plans than we are actually getting in schools and working with you. So one of the conscious decisions moving forward, and we're actually trialling as we speak in some other secondary schools who are in a similar situation, is saying, right, scrap that, don't bother. There's only one plan that's really important for the school, and that's the school development plan. Because the school development plan should capture anything it needs to improve to get out of an Estin review or category, and anything that the school has identified through its own self-evaluation to improve it. So basically, what's been the issue in the past, though, is, I have to say, I'll be totally blunt here, the quality of that documentation has not been good in general. Schools are either over-generous in their judgments, or don't quite highlight the right things, or don't really drill down deep enough to get to the nub of it, shall we say. So again, not being critical, we said, okay, so what we're going to do now, and the trial is moving forward, is that part of the role of the CA is going to work with the school to develop the school development plan. So it's going to be one plan, and it'll include anything. The school will decide, and then we will agree that, yeah, we need to be doing this, 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 and this. And then when we come in, either through EIB meetings, intervention meetings, or when you get called into scrutiny, there'll be one plan, and you'll be able to say, okay, well, what's the progress against this? And we'll talk about the progress against that and what we've done to support the school. So trying to get rid of all this paperwork and concentrate on the real bit, which is schools working together, EAS working together with schools, you know, and just trying to make more time. So instead of having to put 3 days out of a 15-day allocation around paperwork, it's put an afternoon in for paperwork, and let's have 14 and a half days of working together. So coming back to that point, then you can see, bringing it back to the business plan, how we are trying to be proactive all the time.
And to draw attention to page 30, and the service continues to be hampered by short-term ad hoc grants from Welsh Government. Rather concerned there that the EIG reduction for 2018-19 totals £3.028 million. Can you tell us how that's going to impact on the business case and all these plans that we're talking about? Because that's an awful lot of money, isn't it? And when we're told that there's more money going into schools.
I think the comment I would make is, to be honest, the financial discussions are way above my pay grade, but I'll tell you because it's in the report, you know, because obviously at JEG all the finances are gone through, you know, with directors and lead members. The issue with ad hoc grant funding, I'll give you an example before I move on to the EIG chair, as you asked the question. This year, very late in the last academic year, very late in the financial year, in the great tradition of the Welsh Government, there was a bit of cash sloshing around. So we were informed that we could bid for a sum of money to support school-to-school working. We then took the decision after consultation at JEG. It's basically, that's the meeting between like Debbie, our director, and all the directors of education. It was only a small sum of money, but that money would be best served in the most needy schools. So the schools that were in sort of significant improvement categories, special measure categories, we were able to put a sum of money into those schools to develop the quality of leadership by pairing them off with other schools and so on. So there was a sum of money for that. And to be fair, that's worked really, really well. We haven't got that money this year, so we haven't been able to do it. Okay, so, you know, we can do it this year, and where it's working, but we can't do it next year. Now, what we've done to mitigate against that, though, is we have incorporated into next year's business plan a sum of money where it's coming out of our pot, not out of a grant. Being able to put mentor deputy heads in, mentor heads in across the region, and we were in a risk meeting this morning, and there's several of those heading their way into Torvine secondary schools. But the problem is, when you've got money this year and not the next, you can't plan and get something which is sustainable. So it's very much sort of very reactive, which we don't like working that way. In terms of the EIG grant, the way it's written there, it sounds quite damning, but in fact I think the sums that will eventually come out of school won't be that bad, because I think it's more to do with a sort of a top slice at a higher authority administrative level, is my understanding. Okay? But the big one would be the pupil development grant, if that was cut, and they're not cutting that one. Okay, the pupil development grant, you know, is just over £1,000 per pupil, FSM pupil. So there are issues, and I think in terms of finances, I think we're all concerned because, you know, whether it's local authority trying to balance their budget, or the education department, or the consortia, you know, in there you can see the sort of cuts. I think we've had, let me just make sure I wouldn't want to misquote anything. In terms of the reduction in our, when we set up in 2012, you know, I think we're actually 40 less staff out of 120. You know, so, because what we are trying to do, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And I think when consortia were originally set up as well, you know, there was, at the time, you know, challenge advisors who just simply weren't good enough. I'm being totally honest. In the same way that, you know, wherever you work, there are always people who can do it and those who can't. We're in a far stronger position now in terms of quality and able to support the school than I think we've ever been. Certainly the 12 secondary CAs I'm responsible for, you know, I wouldn't swap out any of them, to be honest. But it's going to get to a point where finances are going to impinge, just as it would with schools. You know, if you've got to make schools, you know, with 85% on average of your funding being staffing, if you've got to make a big cut, the only place it's going to go is teachers are going to go. And if they're good teachers, because let's be fair as well with the processes, you can't always, you know, maybe lose the teacher you'd like to lose because they're in the wrong subject or whatever, where the surplus is. So I think we're all in the same boat. And I think there is a huge concern about grant funding. And I think there is a huge concern about when you get grant funding for 1 year and not for another. You know, what was the announcement last week about some element where they're supposed to be rolling all these grants together, but of course they don't come to the same total as the individual grants. There's always a little bit less. And I think for us, for schools who are reliant upon these grants to provide that additionality, whether you come back to intervention or not, and for us, we are desperately trying to invest as much money as possible into frontline, into schools, to fund either the cluster working or the school-to-school working. And I think this is one of the big risks to us, as it is to local authorities, to schools, is the unsustainable nature of not knowing. And what I can pay for this week, and as we all know, if I employ somebody this week and I employ them for over a year, all of a sudden they've got permanent employment, right? So now I've got redundancy costs on top. And, you know, it's an absolute minefield. So I wish there was an easy answer. The concern is the same that you would have from the point of view of a local authority, a council. At the moment, I think we've been very... I'll exclude me from that. I haven't been very sorry. Debbie and the rest of the senior management team have been very, very savvy how they continually restructure to provide a better service. I mean, so it's not just an efficiency saving that you can, as you can see in that table. I genuinely believe now that, you know, what's being provided to schools is a lot better and is really doing what it should be doing. And I think, and a perfect example is it's moving away from paper and reports to actually putting people in schools.
You know, when the consortia started, it absorbed a lot of staff from the local authority they transferred over. Well, that's all been filtered down now.
I know your finance is your topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as you're aware, I'm on the Risk and Audit Committee of the EAS, and I do take on board what you said about grants. I mean, I've been a councillor since 1989. Westminster have always done it. Welsh Government are always doing it. They give you a grant for something. It's great. It works. And then the next year it's not there. So the local authority's got to fund it. But I do have concerns. I mean, there's going to be a significant funding reduction for the EAS in 1819. You've got £170,000 pension hole to fill over the next 2 years. Do you think that you can achieve your business plan with these sort of reductions in funding?
The simple answer, without having a crystal ball, would be yes, because I'm looking at it from the point of view of the quality of the support that we can currently give schools and moving forward into the following year. And I'm confident around that because I think we have better people who can move schools and support schools to work at a faster pace. In 2 years' time, I honestly don't know. We've got staff churn, as any organisation have. You know, for instance, one of our assistant directors is off into Welsh Government. You know, how we restructure after that. You know, it's a bit like a school, isn't it? You know, you got a member of staff leave at the top of the pay scale, you can make a saving, but again, it's only for a number of years till the salaries catch up. So in all honesty, my simple answer is, I don't know. But what I will guarantee is that the quality of the planning to deliver on a high quality service is most definitely there. And for the next 2 years at least, I would say that what you're actually going to notice is, you know, significant improvement in the provision in the schools. The ones to answer that will obviously be your head teachers. But my own personal opinion is that, yeah, we've got a really strong team at the moment.
Can I just add to that, to Julian? It's about schools as well. You know, we've talked in the past about a self-improving system, and this is certainly, you know, the times are there now that whether we like it or not, we have to adopt that system for schools, local authorities as well as consortia, because our budgets are getting tighter and tighter, and yet you know, by working collectively together, and schools, you know, as we've talked about earlier, clusters now are getting far more effective and stronger towards teaching and learning, and that system then will help. You know, it's EAS building on that system and schools building on that system. So if budgets are cut and when they are getting tighter and tighter, actually we can still deliver the same. It's in a different way.
Can I just give you a figure? 2 years ago, when we were running our professional development programme for leaders and teachers, which is basically all the courses, you jump in a car, you go off to Llanrwyn for a day, you have a day's course, you come back to school. Now, that generated £1.5 million. And let's flip that coin. Another way of thinking about it was that basically we were taking £1.5 million out of all the schools' budgets in the region to provide these courses. We weren't just, we didn't turn up in a black mask and rob them because they were going to the courses. They were paying for the courses to go on. But they were still taking that £1.5 million out of the budgets and sitting in our budgets to provide those courses. The professional learning offer next year is all centred around school-to-school working. We are not taking any money out of school budgets. So from that point of view, over the last 2 years, the schools should, I know they won't because of cuts over, but theoretically there's an extra £1.5 million sloshing around in school budgets across the region because we're not charging. Everything has moved into the core offer. And what we're doing, by doing that, one, it's saving schools money, so they've got more money to spend as they see fit. But then it's also about bringing the really good training, which we have more control over, into the school and into the classroom, and having staff working with other staff when all the research there, it actually works best. So not only is it not taking the money, but it's also providing a better service. So that's why I use that as an example. So although the funding might be getting less and less and less, we're also looking and investigating all the best ways of working smarter to provide a better service. So we're not sitting there just thinking about cutting budgets and therefore cutting staff. We're looking at it from the point of how can we provide a better service, and then hopefully from that it'll save us a few pounds, shillings and pence. So I wanted to give that as an example so you can see the way we apply the logic to our planning.
It comes back to sharing of best practice, which we know that works in schools when they're doing that.
Thanks. You addressed most of the questions I had right at the beginning on risk, but one of the things I wanted to ask is under 9.1, there's a risk there. Full use is not made of training offers to ensure that all elected members are up to date with key messages. What are those training offers? How and when are they offered?
If you remember way back at the beginning, I said that this is a regional business plan, and some of these you're going to think, well, hang on, I've sat here and you've listened to either me or Sharon. There are certain statutory things that have to be provided in terms of governance. For instance, if you sit in a governing body, you've got to do this training. If you're a chair of governors, it really is about making people as informed as possible. So we put on a raft of either statutory and sometimes voluntary opportunities for people like yourself to come in and discuss. And especially it's really crucial now with all the changes that's going on, just simply keeping up the speed. You miss 1 month's meeting and almost you could be 2 years behind at the moment. So the risk there, and it's not a particular risk in this authority, because I have to say that, every time I've come in and delivered, and I'm sure you'd say the same, Sharon, there is a reasonable attendance. So it's a bit like a governing body. So to answer your question, it is about value for money, it's about the qualifications, it's about performance. So all the talks that we come in and do, all the things that we do around scrutiny, is all these sorts of things getting communicated to the wider community, if you like. Now, the governing body has its own site now with us, and a complete raft of training courses. There's the professional learning offer, which is in the Argos catalogue, as I call it, if you see it, which is the big book. We're moving away from that as well. So you'll be pleased to know we're killing less trees next year, and that's going online. But I really feel that in some authorities, not this one, what can happen is you can turn up to a scrutiny meeting like this, and you've got to spend the first half an hour actually explaining what the data is and what benchmarking means. And then it becomes a very, very long meeting, and then it's quite easy to lose the message. So it's about making sure that people are informed, because there are so many changes. So that's the risk. But of course, this business plan is the regional business plan. And so, for instance, there's an inconsistent application of agreed regional protocols. Okay. Not in this authority. In fact, this authority is the leading example for that.
So you can put a tick by that one.
Absolutely. A tick and a gold star, Chair. Genuinely. Absolutely.
So basically these risks are not, is there anything there that's applicable to
Timely consideration of statutory powers? No. Again, this authority has been at the forefront. We've got two very good authorities in the region, who I won't name the other one, otherwise it makes the other three fairly obvious. But talking to Torvine, in terms of the timely consideration of statutory powers, consistent applications, schools not held to account, all those things, Torvine is right at the sharp point at the end where you want to be. And when Dermot goes to these meetings, as we did this morning, the risk register meeting across the consortia, the schools at risk, he is always able to speak from a position of strength. I have to say that.
Okay. Any other questions on that? We've got to move on to theme 6.
Just a general question. We're not involved in it. Is there any risk that Torvine needs to be aware of within your plan that we need to work on or ask questions about?
Sorry, I took off. There is nothing that immediately comes to mind, because I think we have such a close working relationship with the schools. Caerphilly, massive authority, I do a lot of work in Caerphilly now as well, because it's a simple case of getting round everything. But Torfaen, it's big enough, it's small enough to be compact, and everybody knows. We meet very, very regularly, whether it's quality assurance, wider groups, certainly with Dermot, and, I'm CA in 3 of our secondary schools out of the 6, and I'm in the other 3 quite a lot in my other role as well. So there is nothing in there that wouldn't be a concern to any authority in Wales, which would say this is a particular Torfaen issue, that you are not doing this. So you're not, no. So.
Are there any other questions there on theme 6 that we haven't covered? Anybody wanted to ask? So you ask on the annex, the Torfaen annex, if you want to ask a question on? I think we've covered most of them.
I'm just wondering the data for Key Stage 4, that's not at the back of the annex. Is that because it's not available yet, or when will it be available?
Right. We're actually in the process of crunching it now, because, as you know, the final benchmark data, I say final, the benchmarking data came out just before Christmas in what was called the draft All Wales Code data set. The Welsh Government 2B data came out literally last Thursday. So it takes a while to percolate through the system. So basically that should be complete ASAP. They're actually working on it as we speak now. But I do share that data as it comes out. For instance, last Thursday, when that data came out, rather than waiting for our Learning Intelligence unit, I actually shared it with Dermot and Sharon in the same afternoon.
Put my scribbles onto it from where our schools are, targets and so forth.
But obviously, in terms of the local authority and working it up into the complete paper, those documents takes Sarah back at the office a bit of a delay. That's all I do. I basically just copy and paste from my own and bring it across.
Okay, any other questions in it? Theme 6, the appendix? No? Okay, can I thank you for coming along this afternoon and going through the plan with us? We've just made some recommendations now. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
I think the important thing, Chair, just to read it, this is part of our consultation through all the committees, so the recommendations are really important. If there's anything you think that, should be in there or isn't, or needs to be nuanced in any way, then, we would very, very much value your input into that. So.
Come back in or no?
No, we talk about you now.
No, that's fine, but no, I was mixing up with the school.
Nothing in there for me.
Hold on, till we come back. Just to make sure I take everything.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ron. Well, you could have brought it tomorrow for me.
Should we? Okay, members, we now have to make some recommendations. If you look at our sort of key areas there for investigation on page 19, just wondered whether there are any comments you made, any recommendations that you wish to make. Do you think the AS business plan supports school to improve existing, ensuring all pupils reach their potential across Torfaen? So have you heard enough there to satisfy you think that the plan will?
Chair, I think we probably need a recommendation that we get some feedback on the reading and literacy work that's going on. So we might have a baseline now at the moment, but I think we need to know that this particular accelerated reader is working and that our pupils are improving.
So, the initiative, but we'd like a feedback on it. Okay. Any other comments there? I think I'd just like to make the one about finances, about the short-term ad hoc grants. And I don't know whether we perhaps would recommend that the executive member make some representations on our behalf to the Welsh Government about this, funding and the sustainability of that. Yeah. Does anybody else?
Because I think looking at the new SDM framework, that's a very short and extremely succinct sentence, but it doesn't really give an idea. It doesn't tell us why, and it doesn't tell us where the shortfalls seem to be, which is at that pre-Year 11 stage of Key Stage 3. Because, basically what they're saying is most of our comps are having problems with Key Stage 3 because they're pushing too much to Key Stage 4. And I think that could do with some improvement. I'm not exactly sure the wording that I use there, but you see what I'm getting at, I hope. I tell you what else I notice. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place, but there's nowhere in that focus that I can see, unless I'm missing somewhere. It's where they're talking about clusters.
No. What point is that,
this is still on page 40. I'm looking at that regional priorities for 18-19. And I can't see anywhere in there, and I feel that there should be something in there about cluster working. Yeah.
And
because we need that improvement that goes through from foundation phase through primary into secondary. We need to be working with these pupils and making those regular improvements all the way through. And they've said so much, Julian said so much about that cluster working with secondaries and primaries. I think that could do with being in there.
It's quite difficult having a whole regional report, whereas an annexes to Torfaen, whereas the report from the officers was that Torfaen's doing it right. There wasn't any gaps in it that we can work on, because every question we asked, was there a gap? Was there anything that Torfaen needed to do? It wasn't. But yet, when we look at the tables, we are one of the lowest achieving authorities across the region. And how can there be no gaps if we're in the position we are? I take on point that you can't believe everything in the tables because of different assessments and different things, but and different areas have different issues. But how can they not? We must be doing it all right if you listen to the officer, but we are obviously not.
I do not agree with what they were saying. I mean, I understand every word that Julian said was the absolute truth. Yeah. But we still haven't got that assessment levels right at primary. When you see how high up we are at primary level and how low down we are at secondary level, there is something wrong with those primary assessments. There has to be. They're better than they were, and they're massively improved, but they're still not right. And he'll never convince me anything different, because you are looking at, I mean, what's the point in having the data if you don't use the data to support your arguments? And he never once referred to the data, simply what they're doing and how difficult it is to measure, and how it's not the school's fault. Well, I'm not saying it's the school. I'm not looking to apportion blame. I mean, if anything, it's the LA's fault, because they should stomp in there with big boots and grab hold of a few books at random and say, no, that isn't what you said it is. You know, there is something fundamental about that data that tells me that we are not doing primary assessments correctly.
Okay, so that's still a concern. So we need to...
Sorry, Chair. It might be that we're doing it correctly and others are not. Because if others are at the top, yeah, that's right, others at the top are assessing their primary school because it's a teacher assessment and it makes their school look good. But now we've brought it in line that we weren't doing it good, but now we've done some work on it. So ours have got to be improving, although it looks, and we knew that it would look worse in any data because of the work that we were doing.
John Sheridan, sorry.
We still don't look as bad as we should at primary level. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I know that, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Chair, I sort of got the impression that the Challenge Advisor gave a robust defence in that respect of a lot of those issues. I was a bit, I thought the local authority position was a bit more vague often in terms of what I was hearing, you see what I mean? Because he was able to actually drill down into specifics, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. Right, when questioned on things or challenged on areas, he was specific. Well, actually, we're doing this because. But the local authority was not. It was a bit. I thought it was a bit less robust, really, in terms of what we were doing. And some of those issues, like monitoring arrangements and things like that, effective pupil tracking. I mean, that should be embedded within schools, and you know, there was some debate, disagreement on the fact that you then can't turn around to schools and blame them if they haven't done it right, but which he defended robustly. But I was just slightly more concerned with the local authority approach in that respect.
Yeah, can I also
agree with that? We had serious concerns when the EAS was first formulated about gamekeeper and poacher, because it's actually the local education authority that pays for the services of the EAS, and surely that business plan should react to the local authorities, what they want as well. And we didn't hear a lot of whether or not this is the correct business plan for our local authority. And perhaps we should have, I don't know, perhaps we should have asked the question of Sharon whether or not she thought the EAS business plan was the right and suited for Torfaen, I don't know.
Basically, what he's saying is it's got nothing really to do with it. What we supply is for the schools, not for the LA. We simply monitor and try to improve so that the LA does better, which, isn't really what we're looking for. But the other thing that sort of surprised me was a lady that was with them from the EAS. Why the hell? Huh? Well, yeah, but I don't understand why she was here, because she never said anything. I don't even know who she was, to be honest. I found that odd.
I think it's really difficult because it's a regional plan. I think, yeah, I think when it's specific to Torfaen, I think that it would be easier.
I mean, Chair, the problem is you've got the generic element, and then you've got the bespoke part, but they're separate, aren't they? And they don't really merge into anything, do they, really? Because you have to look at them separately, because they're separate sections. So, like you say, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Feel happy that all the issues that we have in Torfaen will be addressed then by the business plan.
I'd like to recommend that the local authority give us a report on their thoughts of the business plan, so then we can get the feeling of that is what they're expecting with the money that they're paying and commissioning the EAS to do. So. Okay.
Yeah, I've noted all those down, so I will pull those together in consultation with the chair and forward those on to the committee.
On to our next item, agenda item 6, which is the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee memberships. Members will be aware that we have lost one member of the Scrutiny Committee, and also he was also a member of the School Standards Monitoring Committee. And my apologies, I should have actually welcomed Rose at the very beginning of the meeting, and I didn't. So Rose has been appointed onto the Scrutiny Committee. But we do have a vacancy on the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to defer this item. It is actually an appointment in accordance with the political balance. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to defer this item for another meeting. Okay. So we filled the vacancy on the Scrutiny Committee, but we've still got a vacancy on the Schools Monitoring Committee.
Would it be possible for us as a committee to drop a line to Matt and say, I mean, I know he wasn't here very long, but when he was a member here, he was a very constructive and helpful member, both of the learning communities and the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee, and thank him for his work.
And he did come out on business as well, so we'll do that, yeah. Okay. The meeting, and there's no date of the next meeting. So. Oh, sorry.
Yep,
21st of March.
And in your basket, and for timely, it was raised at council, was Torfaen training. They're subject to a post-inspection from Eston. They had an Eston inspection. Does that something like that? No. So if the committee is in agreement, that will be the next item that goes before them.
21st of March, and it'll be Torfaen training.